Hello and welcome back to another episode of WordPress theme development from scratch. In the previous video, we learned about how to run your development command using pnpm dev from the root. And then we learned about how add WordPress script package is actually bundling stuff and picking up index.js and outputting it here. In this video, we're going to basically extend the add WordPress script package by adding our own Webpack configuration so that we bundle things in a way that we should be doing, which was helpful for our project. Okay, so I'm going to go to the Webpack config file, which is here. And then I'm going to copy this, or maybe I can just download it. And then I'm going to just get that here, copy it here, and then paste it inside of the root of the theme. Remember, we don't want it in the root of the project. We want it here because it relates to here. Okay, so let's take a look at what's going on over here. So the first thing we see here is the default config. Okay, default config is, it's going to pick, like I said, WordPress script already has the Webpack config, add WordPress scripts config, Webpack config. So if you go to the node modules and if you look for add WordPress scripts, and then under config, you would see there's already a Webpack config, right? Can you see, right? So this add WordPress script package already has all this Webpack config. So what we're going to do is we want to ensure that the base config is retained, and then we're going to extend it further. So we pick that up, we pull that Webpack config, right? And then we're just pulling up a bunch of packages like path and fs, which are external dependencies. And then this is the where we are going to define our entries. Okay, and then let me just hold on 1 second. Rename. Yeah, and then we're gonna basically build our entries in this function. Then we are going to get all the entries, and then in the WordPress you must already know that you need to do module.exports and define all your configurations. So whatever entries we're going to build at here up top, we're going to use those entries. As you can see, it's pulling it inside of a variable and adding it here. And remember, we're also adding the default config. So that is your default configuration we're picking up from add WordPress scripts. Then we are outputting it, and then we are going to output it inside of the build folder, which is right here. Okay. And then of course the file name will be whatever the name of that file is, .javascript, and then it should be clean. And then we are doing some optimization by using default config.optimization. We are setting the split chunks to false because we don't want the code splitting, and the reason why we don't want it is because when you do the code splitting, what happens is, let's say if there are two separate components that are actually using the same package or same piece of code, what it would do is it would create a separate file and create a reference of that file into both of those components. And because of that, WordPress, when you are building blocks, WordPress is not able to extract the JavaScript that it actually needs for it to work. So that's why we are stopping that split chunks here. Then we're defining our plugins. This is to copy the PHP file plugins. When we're going to have the PHP files, we want to ensure it goes to the build directory so that, when we are actually enqueuing it, we're not enqueuing stuff from two different places. When we are enqueuing it, we just give it the folder name, and then it picks up the JavaScript, PHP file and CSS file, all of that from one place. So we want to just copy our index.php file, all of that into the build folder. Then we have the cleanup SCSS entry plugins. So inside of the cleanup CSS, we are going ahead and deleting the files we don't need over here. Okay, so I won't get into too much detail just yet. I'll keep that for later. And then we are cleaning up some component asset plugins. So this is to clean up the asset.php files over here, as you can see. Recursively finding the asset.php file in components and deleting it because we don't need it. And then next up we are doing is renaming the block CSS plugin. So if you go over here, this is to rename the index.css to style.css for blocks, and it uses the Webpack's compilation assets to rename before writing it to the disk. What we want is basically when we're building blocks, if we name our CSS file in the source folder to index, we want to output it as style.css, because when you're using block.json, when building blocks, it expects it to be called as style.css. So we're just renaming it when we are picking it from a source file as index, and then we're outputting as style.css. You can name it the way you like, but I like it this way. So that's custom configuration. And then here we are using @. The reason why we are doing that is because we're using an alias to resolve it to the root source directory. So which is why you'll notice over here I'm using @sign, which I did not explain to you in the previous videos, because this is a good time to explain it. So you don't have to do this. I'll show you what I mean. Like ... and then go outside the directory and go outside and so on and so forth. You know, you can just use @. @ basically represents the root of the source directory. Okay. Which actually reminds me, I think accidentally I placed this SCSS folder outside of the source. It needs to be here. So I'm just moving it in. Okay. So now it's see that it's no longer complaining. It's gone. So this represents the root source. So it starts from here and looks for SCSS directory, and then looks for variable, and then it looks for grids. So variables here and grids here. Okay, cool. Okay, so that's that. Under get entries, it's going to pick up it's going to basically initialize the entries object where it's going to store all the entries. It's defining component directory as source components, which is this guy right here. Then is going to check if the component directory exists. Then is going to say what are the possible files that may exist, like index.js, tsx, ts, tsx. So, you know, it'll support all sort of files here. Then it's looping through those and, you know, building it as entries and storing it inside of the entries object. Then it's going to do for the same for the block directories. Let me create a block directory over here. Blocks. This is where we'll keep all our blocks, but I have not added any blocks yet, but we're just setting up all our configuration at one time so that we don't have to keep doing it. And then it's going to recursively scan for blocks. And similarly, it's going to look for a block file. Let's say if we would have created something like grid block, and inside that it would have looked for like JSX, TS, TSX, all of that file, and then the index file. And I think we can remove this. We don't need it because we don't have the view files. Oh, sorry, my bad. Yeah. We might have a separate view.js file in case if we want to basically do a separate enqueue for showing the scripts on the front end. Like, let's say we want to write some JavaScript, some functionalities, which we don't want in the block. We only want to show in the front end. So for that, we'll create a view.js file or JSX or TSTSX, all sort of things. So let's say if this had like something like this, view.js, okay, and we wanted to write some functionalities for the front end in that, and we only want to enqueue that on the front end. So that's why it's going to pick up any view file and is going to bundle it and output it inside of the build folder. So yeah, I'm just going to delete it for now. Okay, then for the view, and then basically scans all the block paths and then builds it for you. Then it's going to do some global entries. So you know, there inside of the source you have the index.js, so it's going to pick up stuff from there and take it as an entry file, and then it's going to look for source for the SCSS directory, resolve for any JavaScript in the source file, then ensure the directory exists, and then it's going to pick up files from .scss, replace it with JS, and create the JS wrapper if it doesn't exist, to auto generate the wrapper file to compile into SCSS file. Because when you're importing, for instance, if you're importing any index file, then it's basically into the JavaScript file, is going to go ahead and convert it into the SCSS file. Okay, and add as an entry, and Webpack will output into the CSS folder via custom output configuration. Okay, so that's all your entries. I'm not going to go too much detail into the the copy PHP file plugin, but it's very self-explanatory as to what's happening. But if you want to get into the detail of that, you can go to the docs and then you go to the build, and then here is going to explain to you each of those plugins as to what they're doing and how they're outputting stuff. Okay, so you have your entry point, output, how the SVG handling is happening, what each of this plugin is doing, right? Clean up SCSS entries, renaming block plugins to match the WordPress conventions, dependency extract Webpack plugin which generates asset.php. All of that information is there in the README, so you can read that. Okay, so I'm gonna keep our focus on to this main things that are happening, which is input and output. Okay, now we'll go back over here and we'll start our pnpm dev. Now it's going to run, as you saw, recursively dev command in all the packages. So in the Aqualite ran the WP script starts, and as you can see, it's actually bundled the file for us. Okay, see how it's done. So now you can see earlier we only had index.assets. Now we have components, we have CSS. This is pretty clean actually, because now if you look, I have all my files exactly sourced from each of those directories the way I have added it, right? So I have a grid, I have an index file, index.js. So now you can see that it's imported that. Of course, these are ifs that basically Webpack uses when converting the JavaScript into the JavaScript, converting basically the modern JavaScript into JavaScript that most browsers can understand. And then you have index.scss, which is these guys, and you can see that it's actually gone ahead and added those styles for you. And then you have index.rtl, which is right to left. That's basically uses it for CSS for internationalization. That's the RTL support that automatically generates that right to left CSS. And then you have your index.php. This is just copied the way it is, no need to do anything fancy here. So that's your source, and from the source here, and that's your build. That's the build output. The same thing for the item.php. This is the source and this is the output, which is great. Okay, and next up is, let's see, I think that's about it for the components. And then you also have the CSS directory where the main.scss is used, which is basically picking up stuff from here. That's that, all the main styles. And now we'll try the build also, because right now you see these guys are not minified, right? So when we are doing the build, it's going to minify it. So I'll cancel that. Oops, I'm using one hand to cancel it. Oops, yeah, there you go. So pnpm build. So I run that. Again, it'll check build is going to run build recursively in all of the packages, and the build in the theme is WP script build, so it's going to look for that. And now if you check, it's minified basically, right? Which is what we need for the production environment. All right, great. Same thing goes. Yeah, it's cleaned up your JavaScript also, because notice that there was nothing. Oops, not here. If you check component in the JavaScript file, there was nothing, right? It was just importing CSS. So it's cleaned up. The JavaScript doesn't have anything. Cool, great. And that's also minified. Perfect. All right, so that's about it for this video, and we'll continue further with our development work in the next video. See you then. Bye-bye.